Welcome to our webinar, the Inflation Reduction Act in Schools. I am Sarah Heine, the Chief of Staff at Undaunted K12, and we'll kick us off today with a few housekeeping announcements. We're asking everybody to mute on today's call. We invite you to put questions into the chat, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Presentation portion of the call will be recorded, and all registrants will receive a follow-up email with the recording and additional resources. We'll now hand it over to Sachin Chedda from DPI for some opening remarks. Sachin is the Executive Director at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and is here today on behalf of Wisconsin's elected State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Jill Underly.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much, Sarah. We're very excited to have Undaunted K12 putting on today's webinar along with all the other sponsors, where we will preview the new federal funding available to schools for healthy, sustainable, and cost-effective clean energy systems. I know that you know, as I do, that many school buildings across the state of Wisconsin are in need of significant upgrades. Operating budgets are very tight, and so we're very hopeful that this new federal funding can help our schools become more efficient, become more modern, and so we can keep as many of your sparse dollars as possible in the classroom. The experience, especially of Sun Prairie, that you'll hear about today is really an outstanding example of what is possible. So on behalf of Dr. Underly, who's out visiting a school as we speak, thank you again so much for joining. I will now pass it over to Deneen Powell, the Interim Executive Director at Forward Together Wisconsin, to kick off the session. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and welcome to today's session brought to you by Forward Together Wisconsin and Undaunted K12. We are grateful to our partners across the state for offering today's event, and we would like to extend a very special thank you to DPI for promoting our conversation today. Today's session will have four sections. The first is an introduction to the Inflation Reduction Act's incentives for clean energy in Wisconsin schools. Next, we will dive into an overview of IRA eligible technologies in the context of potential Wisconsin projects and initiatives. Next, there will be a case study of a local district who is already using these technologies, the Sun Prairie Area School District. And then we will wrap up with an overview on how Focus on Energy can support IRA eligible projects. We are fortunate to have the following speakers join us today. First, Sarah Ross is the co-founder of Undaunted K12 and has over 15 years of experience in helping households and schools embrace clean energy. Kevin Frost is an energy engineer at Slipstream who researches emerging commercial decarbonization technology and consults with building stakeholders to implement building energy efficiency measures. He also leads field research studies of commercial heat pump technologies. Kevin Splain has over 19 years of experience working with building systems. He is entering his 8th year as the Sustainability and Energy Manager for the Sun Prairie Area School District. And Heather Fiam is currently the program manager of Focused on Energy's agriculture program and schools and government program. Prior to that, she managed energy management and project management teams in school districts and was a Focus on Energy advisor for schools and government facilities. Before we get started, let me leave you with 3 big ideas that I want you to take away from today's session. Clean energy technology works in Wisconsin. It is better for our students, and the federal government will help you pay for it for at least the next 10 years. So let's do this, Wisconsin. Let's bring some money to our school, our community, and our kids. And I will now hand it over to Sarah Ross from Undaunted K12 to kick off the first part of today's session. Sarah?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deneen. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Forward Together Wisconsin, for inviting us in to have this conversation about the opportunities for Wisconsin schools. I'm really excited for today's chat. So The Inflation Reduction Act is a large piece of legislation that was enacted in August of 2022. Many of you may have seen headlines around this substantial piece of federal policy that seeks to deploy clean energy in all spaces across the country, in our buildings, in our transportation, in our manufacturing. It really seeks to transform, how we use energy in this country. One of the headlines you may not have seen, though, is that this policy also has major implications and can bring much needed dollars in to improve our school facilities. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the Inflation Reduction Act. When we think about federal dollars available for school facilities, those are usually a rarity. And Tyler, you can go to the next slide. Those of you in school districts are certainly no stranger to ESSER dollars. You've been spending those over the last few years, doing great work to recover from the pandemic. So those federal dollars that may be used for facilities. There are also some dollars for school facilities in what was called the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's money, for example, for electric school buses, grants in that piece of legislation. But today we're talking about yet a third piece of federal legislation that can bring dollars into our school buildings. When we think about this massive piece of legislation, there are really three types of dollars I want you to have in your mind's eye around school buildings. One, there are grant dollars that are available. You may have seen some of the competitive grant opportunities for schools. On the other hand, there are some new opportunities that are really still on the horizon, not yet ready for here and now, that are more in the financing realm. Today, we're going to focus on the middle one, tax credits. And you can advance the next slide, Tyler, because those are really here and now. And from my perspective, the largest opportunity for schools within the Inflation Reduction Act. What's so special about these clean energy tax credits? Next slide, Tyler. If you take nothing else away from today, because I know your brains are all full and busy, I want you to take remember these four ideas. These clean energy tax credits are non-competitive. If you install eligible technologies, your school is eligible to reap these funds. Second, even though they're called a tax credit, they'll actually be paid to schools, state governments, other nonprofit entities as a cash reimbursement. So that's an important feature here. Tax credits do matter for schools. And third, they're available for a good long time. I think, as Deneen mentioned, we have these available for a decade. So we have time to really build a strategy around building these dollars and these new technologies into our plans for our school buildings. And last, as unbelievable as it may be, the funding for these tax credits is unlimited. There is no limit on your school's ability to take down these credits. You're not limited to only 1 or 2 in a year. You're not limited over the 10 years. There's no limit overall for these tax credits across the country. And this, believe it or not, is how the solar industry and the wind industry has operated using these tax credits since 2008. So unlimited funding, against these opportunities. Next slide. The clean energy tax credits support a very specific set of technologies, 5 clean energy machines that you are likely to see, might see in schools. First, solar energy. We know that 1 out of 10 schools actually across the country has already embraced solar. We know we can save money on our utility bills. So that's one that's available for unlimited tax credits for schools. Energy storage. So now we can store that clean energy and use it when we need it using batteries. Ground source heat pumps that you'll hear more about from Kevin Frost. He's an expert on these machines. A 2-for-1 heating and cooling solution that causes 0 emissions, so reducing air pollution in our communities. Fourth, electric school buses, reducing diesel fumes and giving kids a safe and quiet ride to school. And lastly, the EV charging equipment that we need to actually put the electrons in those buses so they run. All 5 of these have unlimited tax credits available to schools that want to embrace these technologies. Next slide. So there's some formulas to figure out how much these tax credits can be worth in your context, but to give you some sense of how many dollars are at stake here, just to run through a quick example for each one of these 5 machines. The ground source heat pumps that tax credit is based on how much you actually spend to install this technology. So let's say it cost you $6 million to install ground source heat pumps in your school. Your tax credit might be about $2 million or so of that. So a substantial part of the cost can come back to you as a reimbursement from the federal government. Solar, that might cost $1.5 million to install and own a substantial array that might provide a good amount of the energy for your district. And you might get $450,000 as a tax credit back on that. Energy storage, those batteries to store those clean electrons, would generate yet another tax credit. So these are all based on how much you spend to install these clean energy machines. That's how the tax credits are calculated. And then moving over to the transportation side, there's a max credit amount per bus. So if you bought 10 electric buses, you might get a credit of $40,000 for each one of those buses. That would yield you another $400,000. Similar with the EV charging equipment. So all told, we're talking about $3.3 million in change from the federal government to install these clean energy machines in our schools that are, again, healthier, more efficient, and are good for the planet. So a substantial contribution from the federal government for all of these clean energy machines. Next slide. So one of the big headlines that we've seen as these clean energy tax credits are making their way out into the world and into new school construction projects, into renovation projects, is that these tax credits, especially for ground source heat pumps, are so substantial. You saw, $2 million in that previous example, that they're actually making the most efficient, the healthiest, the clean energy option, ground source heat pumps, historically the most expensive. They've now made them, in many cases, the most affordable for your district to choose. And we're seeing this pattern emerge across the country and in Wisconsin, as this example shows, both in new construction and in renovation. So you're seeing here an example of a school project that's in the works right now, where they priced out doing a more conventional gas boiler system that priced out at $4.6 million. Without the incentive, the ground source heat pump system, again, a great choice, but was going to be more expensive at $6.2 million. But once they integrated the clean energy tax incentives that are available, they saw that, in fact, after incentives, the ground source heat pump system was going to be the most affordable choice to install. And certainly, as we'll hear from Kevin Splain later on, this is an enormously efficient machine that is very cost effective to run through time, so can really save districts money in operating costs. Next slide. And so the other big headline here, and something to understand as you get deeper into this work, I hope I've whet your appetite to learn more about these tax credits. And what you'll see is this policy also seeks to do a few things, not just deploy clean energy, but to create good family sustaining jobs. So you'll see as you go into this work, there will be cases where you'll be asked not only to pay prevailing wage, but also to include apprenticeships in the construction work at your school. This is good for creating a pipeline of good family sustaining jobs. So there may be cases where that will come into play. Second, you should know that there are extra dollars for certain target communities across the country. So as an example, up in Wausau area, Rib Mountain Elementary School is located in a certain area where they're going to get an extra 10% off their ground source heat pump. And unfortunately, Wausau East High School is not in that special area. So it makes sense to look at various maps, and we have some links that we'll share that can show you, some of those areas. They're called energy communities in some cases, where extra dollars are available to embrace clean energy. The third big policy concept to understand and be on the lookout for is what's called domestic content. There are, again, extra dollars available. In some cases, it may behoove you to source domestic steel and iron for your projects, and source manufactured goods like the heat pumps themselves from our domestic manufacturers, because again, this policy seeks to spur domestic manufacturing also. So be on the lookout for these policy goals as you get deeper into your work to embrace the IRA. Next slide. So looping back, I'm sure you're still kind of stuck on the tax credit piece and how in the world schools take advantage of a tax credit. It is through a new mechanism that the IRS has created called direct pay or elective pay. They have two names for the same thing. And it is basically this concept that they're going to take these tax credits and turn them into a cash reimbursement. They're going to pretend like schools and other nonprofits overpaid on taxes, right? You don't owe taxes, so you overpaid on them by the amount of your clean energy tax credit, and they're going to cut you a check for those tax credits that are due to you. We're showing you a little snip from the White House's page all about direct pay that mentions schools as eligible recipients for this payment mechanism. And you're seeing here on the right, 2 one-pagers from the IRS that talk about, again, how states and local governments and a quick overview of this elective pay mechanism, how it works. So you can learn more about this mechanism from looking at these pages from the IRS. Next slide, Tyler. And to round us out here, to give you a sense of the process, again, these are reimbursements. So, how this might look, how this looks for some schools in Wisconsin that have already installed clean energy machines. You might have installed some clean energy equipment like they did up in Oregon schools, some solar that they installed in the fall of 2023. They are raising their hand, doing a pre-filing registration with the IRS right now. And that's going to give them a unique identifier for their clean energy project. They're then going to complete a Form 990T. It's a simple 2-page form with the IRS. And they're going to complete that no later than November 15th of this year. That's their filing deadline. And the IRS will process their return just like they process all of our individual returns and issue a check to the district. So that is kind of the step process, the sequence of how this will unfold if you install eligible equipment. Install it first, pre-file, file, and wait for your check to show up in the mail. Tyler, next slide so I can close us out and pass us on. So you got a quick flyover of this exciting new opportunity for Wisconsin schools. I hope you will go and visit our website, Schools and the Inflation Reduction Act. The link is here. Please bookmark it. There is just an enormous amount of information on this opportunity. We only scratch the surface here, and we continue to update our website as we have more examples to share with you of schools doing this good work, as things like the IRS opened office hours the other day to field your questions, and we posted links to those on our website. So please bookmark that and hit us up for more information. We'd love to help schools embrace clean energy technologies and make use of these federal funds. And with that, I will turn it over to Kevin Frost from Slipstream. Kevin, it's all you.
Hi, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Kevin Frost, and I'm going to go over these great technologies and opportunities in the IRA in the context of Wisconsin. I work for a company called Slipstream. We're a nonprofit out of Madison, Wisconsin. This is our mission: climate and clean energy solutions for everyone. We do that in a variety of ways, but specific to this webinar, we've recently done this with a handful of school districts here in Wisconsin. Next slide, please. And we looked at all of these technologies that Sarah pointed out are in the IRA. And I'm going to talk about the first 4 of these, and I'm actually going to start with electric school buses on the next slide. So my colleague Dan Strait at Slipstream has done a lot of work in learning and understanding all the things we can do with clean school buses in Wisconsin and in the surrounding areas. And we found that a school district could reduce fuel costs by over 70% and therefore their greenhouse gas emissions by over 50% by converting from diesel buses to electric school buses. They have a range of 120 to 150 miles. That allows you ideally to not have to charge in the middle of the day. So you can do pickup and drop off with your students. There's less moving parts and maintenance with electric vehicles. And most importantly, we reduce our children's exposure to diesel exhaust. My colleague also interviewed several bus drivers, and they are impressed with how quiet the buses are, and that actually improves student behavior. If you go to the next slide, there's a map of the EPA Clean Bus Program. and these are their awards from 2022 to 2023. I believe you can apply when it opens every year, but these are school districts in Wisconsin who have already invested in electric school buses, and are starting to use them. You can see the cost on the webinar slide. It's about $500,000 for a bus plus, $100,000 for that charging equipment. But between the IRA, the EPA Clean Bus Program, and additional funding sources, you can bring that down significantly. There are some things to understand about using these buses in Wisconsin, particularly in the far north, where winter can really reduce the range of the buses. We talked to, it was actually a school district in the UP in Michigan, but they just had to take their buses off of a couple routes in the winter because there was a very rural school district with really long routes, and they didn't have the range in the winter to make it. But there's ways you can work with the school bus manufacturers to understand your limitations. You also need staff training for these high voltage systems. If you contract out your buses, then technically your bus service provider would have to apply for these credits. But again, there's a bunch of funding sources available, and there's a huge benefit to students to getting diesel away and out of our buses. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk very briefly about solar panels. I mean, if you have a roof, then you can start generating electricity off of your roof. For the school districts we looked at in Dane County, the average payback on a solar array was 12 to 15 years before additional financing. So when you add on 30% tax credits on top of that, now you're going from 12 to 15 years to, 7 to 10. Also, if there's any fluctuations in electric costs, if your electricity prices go way up, well, you've now reduced how much electricity you're using off the grid, and you're sheltered from that cost. And of course, there's always the educational benefit for students for learning about new clean energy technology, electric generation. Next slide, please. Real quickly, if you already have solar, you could consider adding a battery. And adding a battery can increase your cost savings, but it also can provide critical and emergency power if there's ever a power outage. So you can use that standalone, or you can combine it with the generator system. And a concept that's becoming, more popular and more needed is the idea of a community resiliency hub. When people lose power to their homes and if they need to go somewhere, they want to go somewhere where they can trust, and a school is one of those places. So you can put in a battery and it can power your cooling. If you have a heat pump, it can power your heating, lighting, phone charging, internet, and provide those services. Next slide, please. But as Sarah said, I think the greatest opportunity from the IRA is with ground source heat pumps. And it's a 2-for-1 clean heating and cooling solution. And just if you're not familiar with them, the way it works is we're going to put in a heat pump, which can do the heating and cooling, and we're going to use the ground as our thermal battery. That means in the summer when it's warm, we're going to cool our building and take the heat out of the building and put it in the ground. And then when it becomes winter, we're going to take that heat out of the ground and use that to help heat our building. And it's next slide, please. When we looked at this for 4 school districts in Dane County, we took every one of their buildings, which is shown on this graph as a bar, and we looked at their energy use intensity, which is basically a single number, kind of like miles per gallon for cars, that we can use to evaluate their electric and gas usage. So one number represents both electric and gas. The New Building Institute, or NBI, says that a school should have an EUI around 27 if it wants to be net zero in our climate. So that's what that red line represents. If you're below that line, then you're ready to be a net zero building. And if you go to the next slide, there, you will see that almost every building that's under that line right now has geothermal heating and cooling. And it's 9 of the top 12 buildings out of the districts that we looked at have geothermal. So it's a huge, huge energy and emission saver. Next slide, please. And the deal with the IRA for 30% tax credits is kind of a crazy deal because it covers the entire ground source heat pump system. So it's not just the bore field and the heat pump itself, it's everything that essentially touches it as long as it doesn't use gas. So that would be all of the pumps, all of the fans, all of the piping, all of the ductwork, and even like the air diffuser or the air vent where the air comes out and goes into, you know, the classroom. If you add a gas boiler to the system, the gas boiler would not be covered. So, but the good thing is you don't need that. So I'll talk about that in a slide or two. If you go to the next slide, what I really want to reiterate that Sarah brought up is that because all of that's covered under the IRA, particularly for new construction, the ground source heat pump is now the most affordable HVAC system for your school. And it's, you know, and that's not factoring in any of the energy savings that come after it. This is just straight up first cost. So I just want to reiterate that point. And then if you go to the next slide, just things that we want to consider when we're in Wisconsin. One concern with geo is, you know, if I'm really far north, will geothermal work at my school building? And the answer is yes. You don't even need a backup boiler. You do need to make some considerations into how you use the system. You know, starting it in the summer and not the winter is very important. You want to make sure you can add a temporary boiler. That's actually not for emergency heating, although you could use it that way. It is actually to help rebalance the ground. I'm getting a little into the weeds on the technical details. So if you have questions, feel free to ask, or you can connect with me via email afterwards. We also want to look at for retrofits. And since geothermal is a heating and cooling system, if you have a building that doesn't have air conditioning, now's the time to get 30% off your air conditioning system. So you can add air conditioning, you can add fresh air ventilation if you don't have that either. But you do want to look to make sure, you know, you have things like enough land for your bore field. And you can reduce the size of your bore field by making sure your building's well insulated. You'll also want to look at your existing electrical infrastructure. Something we recommended to the school districts that we talked with is just to make sure you're, you know, doing a good job inventorying what you already have. And you have 11 years to plan for this. So if you need to do some enabling work, you can. We also, you know, in addition to adding, you know, air conditioning or fresh air ventilation is, you know, or the result of that really is that you're improving your indoor environmental quality. And there is study after study out there. Harvard in particular has done a lot of research in how controlling the environment can improve cognitive performance of students. And then, of course, there's always the educational opportunities with teaching students, you know, about this new technology and the investment your school is making in them. So to talk more about talk more about how this works at an actual school and how it affects those students, I will turn it over to my fellow Kevin Splain, who is the Sustainability and Energy Manager at Sun Prairie Area School District.
Thank you very much, Kevin. As he mentioned, I am the Sustainability Energy Manager for the Sun Prairie Area School District, and I've been here since 2016. But the district started well before I got here with their efficiency push. Back in 2005, they partnered with a third-party company. At the time, it was Energy Education. Now it's Synergistics, to kind of do a wholesale review of our buildings and what would work going forward to kind of save some energy for the district. In that same year, 2005, we got a jump on it with our first geothermal elementary school, which was Horizon Elementary. And then we did some tracking to show that it worked. So since then, we've opened 5 more geothermal schools, 2 before me, our second elementary school in 2008, and our first geothermal high school in 2010. And then since I've been here, we've gone and opened 3 more geothermal schools, 2 elementary schools, both in 2018, mirror footprints. That's shown on the top left of the slide. And then in 2022, just last year, we opened up our second geothermal high school that's shown on the bottom right. So with the new high school, we're now over 50% of our total square footage of the district is served by geothermal at 1.3 million of our 2.3 total million square footage. We also now have over 775 heat pumps in operation in the district, some going back nearly 20 years now. We do have some solar in the district. We were a little late on the game on this one. So we have a total of 320 kW, the majority of which you can see in these two school pictures. The bottom, the new high school has a 285 kW array that was sized to serve about 10% of that building load. And each of the newer elementary schools had a 12.5 kW array that wasn't sized for building load, but more of an educational or a proof of concept. Because our West High School has two separate electricity feeds and the solar is on one of the feeds, we do have days, even in the winter now, where we can spin the meter backwards on the weekend. And this year I'll be giving a report to the school board on our 18th year of energy management. Next slide, please. So this just shows how geothermal makes for more efficient buildings. As Kevin was alluding to, if you want to get to that net zero target, you want to be, I think he said 27. So our geothermal elementary schools are there. Our high schools, which are notorious energy hogs, are nearly there. And then you can see as we go left, we get up to our stadium, which very small footprint, decent energy intensity there. But for our high school, I mean, every high school is different, but both of ours have pools. We have a performing arts center or two, and we have a field house or three at each of our schools, and those are used year round. Most nights, the lights are on until 10 o'clock between events and cleaning. At our elementary schools, at least our newer ones, those are also designed for public use. They feature larger gyms than a typical elementary that's used for outside sporting events. They have large group instruction rooms that we can rent out with community kitchens. And as I mentioned, all those geo schools are at or near that NBI target goal. Next slide, please. I like this slide because it kind of superimposes our district as growing. The blue line represents our total square footage. And you can see as the schools I mentioned open up, our square footage growing. And the red bars are our total energy use. That's not by area or anything, that's actual total energy use between electricity and natural gas in the district. And even with our second high school that we opened last year, we still used less total energy last year than we did back in 2005 with a much smaller footprint in the district. I think that's worth mentioning, and I like to bring that up for the district as well. Next slide. And I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. I know there's a lot of varying people on the call, but I think it's worth covering. There was even a question I noticed in the chat talking about demand charges. So I wanted to bring up a snippet for two of our electricity bills. On the left, it's a traditional school that uses a chiller for cooling, so that's a summer bill. On the right, we have a bill for, I believe it's our newest geothermal high school, and that is a winter bill because geosystems are sized and see our peak demand and use during the winter. So it's worth mentioning that when we talk about electricity costs, typically we're using a blended rate, so dollars per kWh, but there are factors that go into making that blended rate, namely because we're a large energy user, we are automatically on a time of use schedule. So we have on-peak and off-peak energy rates. We also have our demand rates, which are on a monthly and annual basis. So that's the peak 15-minute use, how fast we're using the energy. And then the third component is a power cost adjustment, where utilities are allowed to charge more when they have to pay more, if they have to go outside of their generation, as long as they're going to pay or charge less when they have cheaper energy, which is typically in the winter as well. So with our geothermal schools, we can shift our peak energy use and demands to either off-peak times, if we start our morning warm-up early enough, and when we're using our most is overnight when it's -10, and the winds are blowing, and we're trying to maintain that unoccupied set point in the building. And you can see on the right, we're paying that 5 cents a kWh minus that 2 cents of the power factor adjustment, versus when we're using our peak costs for our traditional schools, that August afternoon, 2 o'clock when everybody's using electricity, and we're paying that 6 cents, which is actually before a rate increase, plus that 2 cents for the power cost adjustment. So a little bit too deep in the weeds there, but I think it's worth mentioning we can see some decent savings just by shifting when we're using the energy, and geothermal does that automatically for us. Next slide, please. This is the slide I typically use when I'm presenting out to the board, when we talk about avoided costs or savings versus what we would be spending if we stayed with traditional facilities. So back in 2005, the red line and the blue line are the same. The red line represents our actual costs for the year. So this is 18 years of actual costs. The blue line represents what we would have spent on utilities. So that's natural gas, electricity. I also include in here water for sewer, water, irrigation, storm. But what we would have spent if we were still using energy at the rate we were back in 2005. So back in 2005, we were paying about $1.38 per square foot for our utility costs. And just last year, including West High School, we were down to under $1 at 95 cents a square foot. So because of that, just last year alone, we were able to not pay $1.9 million. That's money that we didn't have to spend on utilities, and we could put back into other things in the district. For instance, one year we earmarked that money for our iPads for our one-to-one device initiative, but also we can use that money going forward for teacher salaries. Next slide, please. So I have a couple screenshots of my building automation system, the environment I live in on a day-to-day basis. I'm not going to go into details and dissect them, but I like them as a backdrop when we're kind of talking about the design evolution of the geothermal systems. So our first school, 2005, had that backup boiler that Kevin had talked about, and that was, the fear was we were going to use up all the heat in the ground. We wouldn't be able to maintain our temperatures in the school, so we wanted that insurance. We also used that boiler at that school for entryway heaters, that kind of stuff that are traditional hot water heaters for a building. As we moved forward, our second elementary school, even in 2008, we learned that we didn't really need that boiler. It was money that we didn't need to sink into that, so we went away from that. We were still using traditional natural gas heat and DX cooling, normal condensers and cooling coils for some of the larger equipment, like our DOAS units, our dedicated outdoor air systems that supply all of the fresh air to the building. And as we go down the list and we look at our newer schools, we start adding the DOAS units, even the larger equipment, to the geothermal system. Our first geothermal high school, we added the heater for the pool water to the geothermal system. So we kept putting more and more onto the systems. With our latest West High School, we also added our freezers and coolers. That's a production kitchen where we make all of our lunches and breakfasts for the elementary schools. So it's got a larger production kitchen, freezer size, walk-in coolers. So those are on the geothermal systems now. Also at our newest high school, we've gone with a modular pump system. So if you look at our original East High School geosystem, you have enormous pumps back in the loading dock, 3 of them as a backup, whereas our new West, we have 2 independent pump skids. So we have 6 pumps that can all be slowed down or ramped up as much as needed to kind of match the load. So as we've gone through the iteration, we've learned some things and we've been evolving our geosystems. Also, the BAS system affords us a ton of data that we can do some ongoing commissioning, which is just a fancy way of saying we're watching it, seeing how it runs, and tweaking it as need be. With the data that it affords us, we can also make some changes and see the impact. So we can kind of do a little trial and error and see what works for us, what doesn't. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot of looking at one particular classroom. So just to talk to kind of at the classroom level, some of the advantages. We can individually adjust the rooms. That thermostat I can adjust on my computer, or the teacher can adjust in the classroom up or down a couple degrees based on needs. We can see on the graph, not if we zoomed in on it, we only run the heat pump and the cooling or heating as needed because we have the dedicated outdoor air systems that are supplying air, fresh air to the room. The only time we need the HVAC system is for heating or cooling time periods. So on the graph, the bumps on the top right, you can see where the unit comes on, warms up. This is a recent, I think I took this screenshot a couple days ago. So it might run for an hour, hour and a half in the morning, and then it's off for the rest of the day. So we're not constantly using the heat pumps, we're not constantly running the fans, aren't constantly running the compressors. At our newer West High School, we also have occupancy sensors where we can let temperatures in the room float a little bit if nobody's in there. And this also gives us a ton of data for troubleshooting. Next slide, please. So benefits beyond just the costs. So we're looking at using about less than half of the energy we are at a traditional school per square foot. So that translates into cost savings, obviously. But there are other benefits that we're looking at. The pictures on this slide are from one of the geothermal elementary schools. That is a token terrapin statue there. And that is in the middle corridor. We have our pump room. It's not a mechanical room hidden back somewhere where the students never get to see or go. That is a glass enclosed pump room where the kids can see the inner workings of our HVAC geothermal operation. They obviously can't see the bores in the ground, but they can see how the system's working in the building. The top picture is a hallway outside of that glass or outside of that pump room where we can color code the systems and just kind of drum up interest. So we're using it as a teaching tool. The teachers can come down and talk to the kids at a elementary school level about what's going on in the building that way. We also can heat and cool year round. We always have shoulder months where we don't know if we're going to need heating or cooling during the day, or we're going to need some heat in the morning, cooling in the afternoon. We typically don't get 70 in February, but it's a great example this week of what I'm talking about, where the geothermal schools have the ability to do whatever needs to be done. If we got a packed classroom or we had an assembly at a geo school last week when it was 70 degrees, it could respond to that. Whereas our traditional schools, we haven't filled the chillers yet. We're still seeing 15 degrees in the morning. We can't fill a chiller and have a frozen chiller before everything warms up enough. So not only year round, but on a classroom by classroom basis. There are other benefits. The heat pumps in the ceiling. Typically, we put our heat pumps in the halls outside the classroom, so if we need to work on something, we're not disrupting class. But that's as opposed to the traditional elementary school or even middle and high school where we have a univent in the wall. So in a univent system, all of your heating or cooling is coming from one box located on the exterior wall. Maybe the teacher has their desk right up against that, or we have books piled high on top of the univent, so we're not getting that airflow that we need. Whereas in a geothermal system, we have ductwork in the ceiling, nothing can be blocked, the fan's not in the room, so it's not disturbing students, and also we're not sucking outside air individually. We have elementary schools, as Kevin was talking about, the push for electric school buses, where we have to shut our outside air dampers for a half hour in the morning because we have a line of diesel buses idling outside for drop off, and then we have the same thing in the afternoon where we have them lined up for pickup at the end of the day. So we have a more consistent outside air. We're using the outside air that we're bringing in to temper, or we're using the exhaust air from bathrooms to temper the outside air we're bringing in through some heat wheels. So we're saving that way. It's more efficient to do it. And we have control of what's coming into the building. Another benefit, the majority of our equipment is inside. So we don't have rooftops. We're not sending our techs on the roof in February to kind of shovel snow just to find out what's going on with the unit. They love that, and we also love that we minimize roof penetration, so our building envelope is a little tighter on those. I think next slide, I think that might be it for me, and I'll stick around for questions at the end as well. I'm going to pass it over to Heather to talk about the focus on energy parts.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So Focus on Energy is Wisconsin's statewide energy efficiency and renewable energy program. And one important thing to note here is that Focus on Energy is utility funded. And it's really important to catch that piece of information because that means we can stack funds on top of the federal incentives. So I'll show some slides later just as a teaser, but there are there's a lot of really great case studies about how you can stack these funds, how Focus on Energy and the Inflation Reduction Act and other grants that are available can really bring down your investment cost and make these projects really affordable and more appealing for a school district to do now more than ever. So again, Focus on Energy includes 107 participating utilities throughout the state. We work with residents and businesses, and we offer all sorts of support. A lot of people look at us just for our return on investment support, so the actual financial dollars that you receive as checks in the mail, but we also offer expert energy advisor support. We have 8 energy advisors throughout the state ready and willing to help you with energy design assistance on new construction, project planning, things like filling out your rebate application, or just a third-party, non-biased account of, is this technology good? Can you look at this quote for me, and those kind of things. We also provide training to facility staff, help with energy teams, and then we do support energy education, as Kevin so eloquently showed in his pictures before. Sun Prairie has also participated in our Renew Our Schools program, which is a great way to educate your students, and Focus on Energy supports those efforts as well. Next slide, Tyler. So just to go into a little bit of detail about some of those funding opportunities, this is our return on investment support that I mentioned earlier. Focus on Energy offers 2 kinds of incentives that can help you with this support. The first one is prescriptive rebates, which is a specific dollar amount for your energy efficient equipment. So if you see it in our catalog, it's a 1-for-1 replacement of those commonly used equipment, your lighting, maybe a boiler, different things that is just a kind of a line item that is not a complex replacement. Just as a note, you do have 60 days to submit that, and you need to submit an application and an invoice in order to receive those incentives. Next slide. If your equipment doesn't fall into those categories, the custom incentive is the way to go. And this is where the geothermal incentives would fall if it's an existing building. So these custom incentives are offered when a prescriptive is not available, or you might consider this as a more complex system. This does require pre-approval, and you can work directly with your energy advisor to identify what your incentive is, and your incentive is based on how much energy you save. Now, geothermal is a little bit tricky because you're changing your usage from natural gas or dependence on natural gas to electric. So it works really well if you get your energy advisor involved right away, help them with some of those calculations, or help identify some of those calculations, so you can identify your incentive that's going to be available in addition, again, to those IRA incentives. Next slide, Tyler. We also have renewable energy incentives, and there are custom incentives for renewable. Now, it's a little tricky because custom Focus on Energy actually considers geothermal incentives an energy efficiency incentive, and the federal government considers geothermal a renewable incentive. So there's a little bit of a caveat there in the fact that, which actually works out great for Wisconsin, because you can then stack our Focus on Energy rebates on top of these IRA investment tax credits. So it works out really great. But our other renewable incentives are available. We have custom renewable incentives, and then solar PV incentives, which is based on your KW that you are installing, limited to $50,000. And you should also look, when you're doing that, to reserve those funds ahead of time so you can make sure they're available for your district. Next slide. All right, and in addition to some of those return on investment support, we can also help with a lot of planning. I'm not going to go through these in detail. You can check out our website for some of these advanced programs, or work with your energy advisor. But we do have support in project planning, assessing different projects, auditing, building optimization, those kind of things to further your energy efficiency efforts. Next slide. And again, I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but we do have new construction incentives. So as you're planning those geothermal systems or putting solar on your new building, or evaluating if it's the right choice for your new building, getting involved with Focus on Energy early so that they can help do a free customized whole building analysis of your geothermal system compared to that natural gas boiler is one of those technical assistance, non-biased third-party assistance that Focus on Energy can provide. We do also have some other incentives based on product and equipment if you don't get involved quite as early. A few additional resources that we have available. If you're looking at where to start, we do have our Energy Best Practices Guide that's available that can help you walk through creating an energy management plan. It can help you identify some of the best practices. If you are saying, gosh, I have T8 lighting, what can I do? Tells you about the LED technologies, or I have this lesser control system and I would like to learn some advanced control strategies. This Energy Best Practices Guide is a great place to go to find some of those resources. Next slide. Another great resource is our training and education. That's another benefit Focus on Energy provides. You can go to focusonenergy.com/training, and there's a list of great training on demand, and then also live and in-person trainings as well. Now, this is our Energy Advisor map. This is our wonderful contacts that you can get involved with, and they are going to walk you through the incentive process, be your guide for identifying some of those energy efficiency improvements, some of the renewable energy opportunities, and they can help you out throughout the process. Next slide. Oh, I think we're missing the case studies, but that's okay. We're gonna we'll roll through it. Some of the case studies, just to share, we did have some availability for funding within Focus on Energy. You can stack those incentives on top of each other. The IRA incentives can be, again, up to 30% of your project costs. So if you're looking at like a 100 kW solar PV system, you can stack that 30% IRA incentive along with about $13,000 for Focus on Energy incentives on top of that. In addition, you can put other grant opportunities such as solar on schools that's available through the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. You can stack that on top of there, and that brings your payback from 12 to 15 years that Kevin Frost mentioned, down to 5 to 7 years, which is a really great payback for Wisconsin. In addition, some of the energy design assistance opportunities that are available with your new construction buildings, we've seen incentives up to nearly $100,000 just for the installation of Focus on Energy, or just for Focus on Energy rebates to help and assist putting in geothermal, additional controls, lighting, and those kind of things. And that would be, again, in addition to your 30% incentives for the geothermal system or other solar that you put on with the Inflation Reduction Act. So some really great opportunities to stack on those incentives and really get a great payback for your district.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Tyler, if you can just roll back up one slide there. Sorry, that was me. Wow, we've just heard a ton of awesome information from the Kevins, from Heather. Thank you so much all for being here. We're going to move to your questions here in a moment, but I just want to give you some sense of when you walk out of this webinar, where you can go from here. So as we've been traveling the country talking about these opportunities for schools, we've thought about some of the steps they can take. And, one of the first items is to put the Inflation Reduction Act on the agenda, so to say, right? So convene a meeting with your facilities staff, your finance staff, your sustainability leaders, and, start to learn about what this new policy can do for your district. Start to learn together about it. We have a great one-pager that's linked here. Sarah, maybe that can go in the chat. that you could use as a conversation starter with other members of your district team. If you're an educator, if you're a parent, you could lob this into some of your district staff, your school board. The next thing is to really, so that's kind of the laying the groundwork, putting it on the agenda. The next thing is we've got kind of 4 channels of work below that. The first channel is really to claim credits for work that you may have already done that's eligible. So tax credits are available even for work that was done last year in 2023. So if you put solar on a school, if you put some EV charging, equipment at a school district, you may already be eligible for credit. So that's the first sleeve of work, is to figure out whether you did stuff that's already eligible for in that last year. The second is to, really understand if you're putting any of those clean energy machines into service, you have a project right now, make sure you understand how the IRA, kind of the rules of the IRA road, and make sure you apply those new rules so that you're, going to make sure you're in a position to claim all those credits. The third sleeve of work here is to really, take another look at some projects that you may have still in early schematic design type stage where, you thought you were going to do a gas boiler, but oh, wait, once we look back at the math and look at these tax credits, both from the IRA and the help that Focus on Energy can provide, maybe it's actually going to be more affordable for us to make a different choice. So take some hard looks again, ask some questions. There are, still architects and engineers out there that are still learning to integrate these incentives into the conversation, push them, ask them questions about that. And then lastly, and this is really, the big strategic opportunity, take an IRA lens, that is an Inflation Reduction Act lens, to your long-term facilities and capital plans. As we talked about at the top of this hour, these tax credits, these unlimited, non-competitive tax credits, are available for a decade. So we have time to conceive of projects, move them through what I know is a hard and long process for us in the school space, but we really have an opportunity to reflect on, how can we get the most of these dollars into Wisconsin schools over the next decade. It's going to take planning to do it, but planning can really get the job done. So take another look at those plans. Next slide, Tyler. There's a ton of new resources. If we haven't already given you enough links in the chat, here's a whole slew of additional resources where you can learn more about the Inflation Reduction Act and go deep on, again, the opportunity, the technology that is really the big dollars, ground source heat pumps, if that's a new technology to you. I know Kevin Splain shared a bunch of great information about their experience. And lastly, we are here, all 4 of us, with we can answer your questions today, and certainly hit us up for more information after this session. Next slide, Tyler. Yep, sorry, that was the contact information. I'll leave that up there for 1 sec, but you'll get these slides. Next, and almost second to last, next slide, Tyler. We really want to hear about projects that you are doing, those 5 technologies that we discussed that will leverage the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, this is a new policy, and part of our mission as an organization is to get the word out. When we tell the story of the good work that you're doing, you're going to inspire other schools to follow in your footsteps. So please let us know if you have a project where you're expecting to harvest these clean energy tax credits. And with that, I believe I am turning it over to Mandela to close us out.
Well, just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. Want to thank our partners at UndauntedK12, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and of course, Forward Together Wisconsin for having this informational session that hopefully will help us continue to move the state of Wisconsin forward in terms of expanding our clean energy opportunities. Now, as we push forward into the future, I can't think of a better way to invest in our future than by literally investing in our future and making sure that our young people all over the state of Wisconsin have the opportunities they need to be in a happy, healthy environment, as well as learn about what it takes to be champions of conservation and doing the right thing when it comes to clean energy and keeping them away from the burdens of a fossil fuel future. So with that being said, we know a few things. One, that is clean energy works in Wisconsin and it works well. You've heard some amazing examples. We know that it's better for our students. And that's why we have to do everything we can to fully invest and make sure we take advantage of the opportunities in front of us. And lastly, the federal government will help us pay for it for at least the next 10 years. Now, when we led the Climate Change Task Force, Our recommendations came with the assumption that we'd have no help from the federal government. And it is incredible to see how things have changed in the last 4 to 5 years with an abundance of resources that we could have never imagined. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank you all for everything that you will do in the future, because I certainly know that the folks who've taken the time to join us today are going to push for better outcomes, are going to push for more clean energy adoption in school buildings and school districts all across Wisconsin. So we look forward to bringing as much money as possible to Wisconsin for clean energy technology. We look forward to deploying resources in as many places as possible, especially those places that did not think that it was possible for them to do so. So just hope everybody stays tuned for recording of today's session, which will be sent along, including links to show you how to get involved. And most importantly, I hope that you will share those links and share this information with others who may have missed today's briefing. And just again, thank you for everything you're doing. I want you to make sure that you do also tell us about the exciting projects that you have going on. And if you see other projects going on, whether it's around the state or anywhere else in the country, we want to know about that too. If there are things that are being done better in other places, we want to know. We want to be able to replicate those successes. And we also want to be able to be an example for cities and states across this country who have yet to get their projects off the ground. So again, UndauntedK12, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and Forward Together Wisconsin, on behalf of all organizations and entities involved, I want to say how much I appreciate you being with us, and I look forward to seeing everybody soon.